We're talking about people who never agreed to have their funds loaned out, who never agreed to have their funds put on margin. They should have, according to your terms of service, one-to-one backing. It should all still be in some bucket somewhere. And are you confident today, as the CEO of FTX, this has nothing to do with Alameda, are you confident today to say that those are absolutely real and they exist?
Well, how about people who didn't withdraw and were also in that bucket? And part of the answer is, well, there still do exist some number of billions of dollars of assets, of hard assets in the estate.
No, is there one-to-one assets?
What is going on, dreamers? So we are going to do a little bit of learning. Sam Bankman Fried, or should I say fraud, was recently interviewed by our friend Coffeezilla, and here's how he got him to admit that the entire FTX thing was a fraud.
If you're trying to do things with good intentions.
I'm about to go up.
Okay, Coffee, you're up.
Hey, Sam, it's me again. I just wanted to ask real quick about the terms of service question, which Rect brought up a little bit. I want to expound on it. Can you just tell us, yes or no, were you treating client assets just on the regular digital asset side different from the margin trading side?
So I'm not a big follower of stocks, of stock exchanges, of cryptocurrencies, but from what I know and what I've researched about this, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below, leave a like on the video, let me know if this is correct. So basically there are two portions of FTX that people could trade in. There was the one side where people could make customer deposits and they could leave their deposits in the exchange in hopes that if they ever had to pull out their deposits, they'd be getting a return on the same amounts. Then there was the portion where people could trade on margin, which is basically that you could take out a loan from FTX for a certain amount of money and you could trade in the stock exchange with that amount, hoping that obviously things would go up. And if they did, you could pull out the money that you took out, paid off the loan, and then you'd keep the profit. However, when the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, then all of a sudden, people that had put their monies in this side of the company, in the straight deposit side, were not awarded their money back. And Sam Bankman Fried's, or fraud's, explanation for this was that because people on this side could trade for margins, that when the company filed for bankruptcy and people started to mass withdraw their money, it was just first come, first serve from either side, either pot, even though their terms of service has stated that that would not happen, and that those who put it in this pot, in the deposits pot, had their money at a one-to-one secure ratio, that if they put in a certain amount of money or a certain amount of Bitcoin or whatever, FTX coins, they could pull out the same amount. But that wasn't the case. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There were a bunch of different sides, or more than two sides there. But I do think that we were cognizant of the fact that like there were differences between uses for like, you know, margin versus staking versus spot versus futures collateral versus other things.
Yeah, just people. I'm just talking about people just putting Bitcoin on the exchange.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was really clear terms of service around that. If it's true that you didn't invest client assets, not even in treasuries, as you said via a now deleted tweet, why do those client assets no longer exist?
So I'm trying to trace through some of this. Here's my best guess, and I wish I could give you a more confident answer, but I don't have the data. But my best guess is basically it's a combination of the following. One piece is the transfer sent directly to Alameda Research from customers. One piece, and that I think is a fairly substantial piece. One piece is.
Wait, can you explain what that piece means? So people were sending money to Alameda instead of, they were getting credited on FTX, and Alameda just ended up using those funds, and they were never held separately per the terms of service.
Well, there was a separate legal agreement with that. I don't know the details of it. I don't have it in front of me, but there's a separate legal agreement with respect to transfers that were sent directly to Alameda Research by users, especially before FTX had its own bank accounts. And so I do think that is part of what happened there, likely.
So now, just for a further explanation, and again, please educate me in the comment section down below, because I am no genius, far from it, on this topic. So basically what Sam is saying is that For a portion of FTX's lifespan, they didn't have their own bank account and they were utilizing Alameda Research as their primary bank account or where they were keeping customer funds. As a result, when people were making purchases or putting deposits onto FTX on the deposit side, not on the margin trading side, on the deposit side, when they were putting those funds into that portion, that money was getting sent straight to Alameda Research and they were being credited on the FTX app or the FTX website or whatever. They were being credited by FTX that they had certain amount of funds in. However, those funds were controlled by Alameda. Is that correct?
Let's focus on only client assets that happened after FTX got a bank. Y'all said digital assets are treated a very specific way. Why were those digital assets not treated that way?
So of the remaining piece, and there's a few other pieces as well around futures and other things. I understand that's not what you're talking about. For the ones that you are talking about, right? For the ones that were left, and I'm just taking a stab at this because I don't have the data, but my best guess is the following: is that there were a lot of those assets remaining. We processed something like $5 or $6 billion, I think, of withdrawals over the few days prior to, or I guess the few days during the crash, and there are still a few $1 billion of those remaining, I think, in the estate. And so you put those together, you have many billions of dollars of those assets. But I think, and so that's part of the answer, is that there were a large number of actual assets there. I think there's one follow-up question you probably still have there, which is, well, how about people who didn't withdraw and were also in that bucket? And part of the answer is, well, there still do exist some number of billions of dollars of assets, of hard assets in the estate.
No, is there one-to-one assets? Because that's the whole thing. We're talking about a separation of funds. So those funds should be in a different place, in a different wallet than everybody else. What you talked about, servicing billions of dollars of withdrawals, has nothing to do with those specific digital assets, because that's just first come, first serve, whoever pulled out first. We're talking about people who never agreed to have their funds loaned out, who never agreed to have their funds put on margin. They should have, according to your terms of service, one-to-one backing. It should all still be in some bucket somewhere. And are you confident today, as the CEO of FTX, this has nothing to do with Alameda, are you confident today to say that those are absolutely real and they exist and they're present, people are backed one-to-one on client digital assets?
I think that is a very, very important question that he has to ask. And I'm very happy that he took the time to formulate himself to ask this question, because this is a huge deal in terms of the world of cryptocurrency, the world of digital stock exchanges, and just digital currency in general. This is a huge deal because governments are starting to potentially think about getting involved with digital currencies and digital stock exchanges because of the amount of people that have lost money as a result of FTX crashing. From what I'm understanding, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, basically what Coffeezilla is asking is there has to be a number of people who put their money into FTX after FTX had its own bank account. There had to be a certain amount of people that put their money into FTX, that kept their money in FTX, who now, after multiple people are withdrawing and FTX filed for bankruptcy, they should still be able to today draw out the same amount of currency that they put into FTX when it initially had its own bank account and it was set up as its own separate entity from Alameda Research. Now, again, could be wrong, but I would think that if a company has in its terms of service that if you put money in one-to-one, meaning if you put one Bitcoin in, or if you put one FTX coin in, or if you put one Dogecoin in, or whatever, the value of that Dogecoin might change, but you should still be able to pull that one coin out after it's been put in. And I believe that a lot of people, billions of dollars worth of people, have not been able to see that exact one-to-one ratio of pulling out what they put in. So I believe that is the current issue, and Sam is doing a phenomenal job at dodging these questions. Like, he's answering questions that you might hear and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, but he's not answering the question that's asked. And that's very, very, very weird. This entire situation is very, very, very weird.
Just taking a stab here, but I think what happened is that if you look at especially a lot of the withdrawals that happened, those withdrawals were not necessarily only coming from people who never used margin trading or futures or staking or anything else. Those weren't just withdrawals from people who were keeping one-to-one backed, or were sort of just keeping them as pure spot balances. And it was omnibus wallets, between the various categories. And so I think that the answer to your question is that a number of those assets were withdrawn by people who had balances on the exchange, potentially in the few days prior to the collapse. And if you wanted to think about it this way, it could be that that happened, and then when the collapse sort of completed, that effectively meant that there was, if you wanted to put it this way, like fungibility created during those withdrawals between assets for people who had and had not been using.
But that means that there is no separation of funds. If there's fungibility between two different buckets of category, there are no buckets. It's just one bucket. Everyone's taking out of the bucket, which means substantially anyone who had your terms of service with digital assets wasn't actually subject to that terms of service. They were subject to the same terms of service of your margin trading, right? Which is your more risky product. So you subjected everyone to the higher risk product because fundamentally, when it came down to it, you're saying there's fungibility. It's $1 here, $1 there. Everyone can take out $1 as fast as they want. Don't you see that as like defrauding your customers, the people who trusted you to just say, hey, this is not going to go anywhere except for we're not investing your assets. If I can exchange one-to-one, and I'm the one who put risky stuff on with risky assets with risky terms of service, I can take the money that someone who didn't sign up to those same risky terms didn't agree to. Isn't that fraud?
So I think that he might have caught him a little bit there. And I think I have a general and broad layman's explanation of what might have happened. So basically what Sam is saying happened is that in the days leading up to the crash of FTX, people did begin to pull out their initial deposits that they had on the deposit side, in terms of people that just put money in terms of a placekeeper, or just put deposits in without trading on margin, without taking out loans, that they just had their own personal deposits put into FTX that they were going to use for trading. Then, once the crash began to happen, people on the trade on margin side of it began to also pull out their funds. So as the company began to crash, people were pulling out their money left and right. And at that point is when it became whoever comes to pull out their money will get their money so that there's no issues. But the problem that created was that because people that were trading on margin had seen a decrease in the amount of money they were supposed to return on, they're now pulling out money from this pot. Say, for instance, you took out a loan for $10,000 to trade on margin, and then you lost out on that loan. So there's only X amount of money left, but it's less than $10,000. You still try to pull out your full $10,000, and Sam Bankman Fried and FTX are giving you your $10,000 because they had the money over here. So let's say you were left at like 6K, you messed up, you lost out on 4,000, you tried to pull out your full money, and they just took money from this pot and gave it to the people that were pulling it out from either pot. So people from this pot were pulling out their full amounts, people from this pot were pulling out their full amounts, and the people from this pot who were supposedly protected one-to-one did not get their rights protected as they were promised by the terms of service one-to-one, because there were people over here who had deficits, who had lost out on money, who were still able to pull out the full amount that they wanted to pull out at the risk of those who didn't pull out ahead of time here getting their money given to them. That's my full understanding of it. And I'm also not gonna just do the entire video from Coffeezilla's video. So please head over to Coffeezilla's channel, watch the remainder of this interview that he has with Sam Bankman Fried, and just check out his channel in general. And again, I am nowhere near an expert on this subject, so please, please, please let me know how this actually played out. If you're a mastermind when it comes to cryptocurrencies, when it comes to stock trading, let me know exactly where I got things wrong, how I got things wrong in the comment section down below. Leave a like on the video, please, and subscribe to keep informing me so I can keep informing you. Dreamers, out.